nursing skills, we'll say. Procedures, let's say procedures. Top 5 nursing procedures. Since we're going with the theme of top 5 nursing things, let's go with top 5 nursing procedures. The 5 hardest that I can come up with. Nursing procedures, we're going to use med-surg or long-term care procedures. So no intubations, no PICC line access, due to the fact that the nurses that do that are that's typically their only job. They typically are, their job title, job role is like IV access nurse. So they do the PICC lines. Or, respiratory typically does the intubations. So, not getting into that. So, with that said, let's go with our top 5. So, the easiest out of the 5 is going to be IVs. Ooh. But the catheter insertion, we'll say. This can include the phlebotomy skill of it too. Every now and then a nurse has to draw blood. Sometimes veins can be a little bit squirrely and you can't hit them. Sometimes you gotta get 2-3 nurses to get an IV started. It happens. But it's the easiest on my list. That's why it's number 5. Number 4. I'll probably, if there was one that I was going to catch some flack over, it would be this one. Sterile procedure. Sterile procedure. You say, Chris, how in the world can sterile procedure be that bad? It's not really the sterile procedure. I'm really mainly talking about gowning up. Getting yourself into the sterile field. That's the number 4. In my opinion, it's harder than starting an IV or finding a vein to draw blood, because you have to keep your hands above your waist. You have to touch everything in that 1-inch barrier, and if you don't do this skill all the time, I do not, it's not the easiest thing in the world to do. I get frustrated at myself quite often when I'm doing sterile procedure, because I'm like, oh, was that within the inch? Was that, oh, did I touch the inside of that glove or the outside of that glove? Sterile procedure. That's number 4 for me. Number 4 is sterile procedure. It gets aggravating. Number 3, wound care. I love wound care. I do. I love wound care. You do wound care in med-surg, you do wound care in long-term care. Wound care. The reason why it's number 3 and not number 5 is because you have so many different types of orders and different types of bandages and different types of wounds, and you got to measure this, cut that, put the sponge in there, suction there. If it's a vac, I've dealt with vacs. I don't like dealing with vacs. Vacs are terrible. They do great work when they're hooked up properly, but they beep constantly when they're not hooked up properly. Number 3, wound care. Wound care. It's number 3. Number 2, sterile wound care. That's right, I changed it up on you. Well, you know what? I'm gonna go ahead and keep it number 2. Sterile wound care. Every now and then, you get a wound that's sterile. Now, this is different from a clean wound. Clean wounds are, the vac is typically a sterile wound care. Typically it is, because it's really there to get stuff out, and a lot of times you can see bone when you're doing a vac. So sterile wound care is number 2. Sterile wound care. There's a cow that is out right now. I know you can't see it right now. There's a cow. He's just looking at me right there. He's just like, what's up, Chris? What's up, cow? I'll see you later. Number 2, sterile wound care. I know I got off on a tangent there, but it's not often you see a cow just hanging out outside of a fence. I don't live in, places where they do that. Anyways, back to number 2. Number 2, sterile wound care. Not to add to the sterility, but you also got to do the wound care. So now you have sterile procedure plus the wound care, and not only that, you have to stay sterile while you do the wound care. It's hard. I love wound care. I do. I love wound care. I wanted to get my wound care certification. I did not, but I love wound care. It's awesome, I think. But the sterile wound care procedure is my number 2. My number 1 number one. And I might get some nurses that agree with me, I might not get some nurses that agree with me, is catheters. Whatever you want to call them, in and outs, Foleys, the indwellings, that's more of like a specialty thing, but you may have to change the bandage on an indwelling catheter. But catheters, the procedure of getting them into the bladder, is my number one. It is my number one. And I'll go a step further and say female Foley catheters are the hardest. They just are. The anatomy is just, it changes when you get older. A lot of times it's older adults that you got to do this on. Number one is Foley catheters, and I have the hardest time staying sterile. I have the hardest time staying sterile, finding the hole sometimes. Number one is Foley catheters. You got to stay sterile for, well, just catheters in general, not necessarily indwelling, because indwellings, they're in there, they're typically placed by urology. You may have a specialty nurse that can do them. I cannot. But Foley catheters, I will go ahead and say, a lot of you are probably like, Chris, you have your trach and vent certification. I do have my trach and vent certification. Yes, I do, but that's a specialty. I do have my trach and vent certification, but like I said, we're going med-surg, we're going med-surg, long-term care. A lot of times, if you have trach and vent people, you will probably have either a respiratory therapist or a nurse who's been certified in it. Yes, it is. You can see it on a med-surg or long-term care, but I did not include that in this list. I didn't feel like it was appropriate for med-surg. So, trach and vent, yes, it is difficult. You got to hold that thing in there. It's hard. I don't like doing it. I do it. I don't really like to. But that's why I did not include it in this list, because I considered it not med-surg. So, I hope it helps. I hope you like my list. If you don't like my list, let me know. What's your 5? What are the 5 that you just can't do, or you have the hardest time doing? Don't know. Let me know. Hope it helps. Thank you much.